Today, I want to talk about downward facing dog and specifically how you can fall in love with it. When you're new to yoga, or if you haven't been practicing in a while, downward facing dog might not be your favorite asana, but it's kind of hard to avoid. It's almost in every single yoga practice that you're going to be exposed to. So it's one of those asanas you're going to have to embrace. But what I have found is, for me and most of my students, is downward facing dog is kind of the gateway pose. Once you discover what there is to love about down dog, it kind of transforms your experience with yoga altogether. So when I fell in love with down dog, that's when I fell in love with yoga. It kind of happened simultaneously, because at first I didn't really get it. I didn't understand what I was supposed to be feeling and experiencing. It was just awkward and it was uncomfortable. It was uncomfortable on my wrists, it was uncomfortable on my hands, and it was hard for me to hold it for any length of time. But as I started to get more comfortable with it and could move around inside of it and breathe, I really started to see the benefits of it, and it made me feel great. To this day, it's one of my favorite asanas. So let's talk about how you can fall in love with downward facing dog. So we're going to get started on our hands and knees. So coming into table, hands underneath your shoulders, knees underneath your hips, and just take a moment to feel the ground beneath you. Spread your fingers wide, root down through the heel of the hand and each finger all the way into your fingertips. So get a really good solid foundation through the hands. And this is, for starters, this is a really good stretch for the hands. When you're new to downward facing dog, you're really probably going to be feeling it. It's going to be uncomfortable in your hands, and it might be uncomfortable in your wrists, because just like everywhere else in the body, they haven't been stretched very much. And the more you do it, the more comfortable you're going to become with it. So what you want to do is start by getting comfortable with your hands, fingers spread, get a nice stretch. Just by doing this is going to help stretch out the hands for you. So let's take a few breaths, and we're going to start to warm up the body, because we never want to go right into any asana without warming up first. So as you inhale, let's let the heart and the belly kind of soften toward the earth and lift both ends of your spine, getting a stretch in your belly. As you exhale, pull the navel in, lift and round your back, tuck your tailbone, tuck your chin, get a stretch between the shoulder blades, all up and down the spine. Inhale up, exhale round. And then again, inhale up and exhale round. Let's do this a couple more times. Good. One more. Good. Now let's go ahead and stretch out the feet a little bit, because believe it or not, they're going to get a good stretch in down dog, but let's go ahead and get them warmed up. So curl the toes under, and to the best of your ability, sit back on your heels. This might not be super comfortable. Just do the best you can, and if you need to, you can come out of it for a breath or two, and then you can come back into it. So with yoga, you're always just kind of easing into things, being really gentle with your body. So sit back on your heels. If this is not comfortable on your knees or on your thighs, you can roll up a yoga mat or a towel and put it behind your knees to give you a little bit of lift, so you don't have quite so much weight back on your heels. So let's just get a nice stretch through the feet. And while you're doing that, interlace the fingers behind your back with your palms facing toward each other. If you have the palms facing away, your shoulders are going to tend to round forward. Palms facing toward each other, and then you can draw the shoulders back and down. And just get whatever stretch you can comfortably get here. And let's take a couple of breaths. Good. Release the arms. Let's roll out the shoulders. You can uncurl the toes at this point. And let's come back into table. Now just to gently stretch out the forearms a little bit more, you can turn one hand over, get a very gentle stretch here. Taking a good 2 or 3 full breaths. Good, and then you can do the other side. Good. And coming back into table. So one more good stretch that we're going to do here is a puppy dog stretch to kind of work our way into a full down dog. So walk the hands forward and bring your forearms onto the mat. You can draw that left hand in to kind of touch your right elbow and then reach that right arm forward. So just kind of walk the fingers forward as much as you comfortably can. Keep your hips over your knees and let your forehead rest on your left forearm. And let your heart sink toward the earth. So we're aiming for a nice stretch in that right shoulder, but it should feel good. Don't go any further than you need to. And then breathe into it. Good. Keep breathing here. Finding that perfect stretch. This should feel good. If you're holding your breath, waiting for me to move on to the next thing, then you're probably trying too hard here. Just find that perfect stretch that you can enjoy breathing into. And that's the trick. Find that sweet spot. Good. And then inhale. Let's walk that right hand in. Again, coming down under the forearms, you're going to bring the right hand down to that left elbow. And then you're going to start to walk that left arm forward. Hips stay over the knees, and then heart sinks toward the earth. You can bring your forehead to your forearm. Breathing here. Good, inhaling up. Let's actually just bring both forearms forward. Keep the hips over the knees, and then you can wiggle the hands forward until you find that perfect stretch. Your forehead can be on the mat, your chin can be on the mat if you're really flexible. And if you need to, you can put a block underneath your forehead. So make this work for you. So find that perfect stretch. Never forcing anything. Good. Inhale, lift the shoulders. Let's walk the hands back in. And then just kind of move around a little bit. Feel how loose you feel in the shoulders. Good. Now, walk your hands forward a good hand's length, at least a full hand's length. So your hands are not going to be under your shoulders for downward facing dog. You're going to walk your hands forward. If you want to check your distance, then bring your elbows underneath your shoulders and then just lift your elbows. That's a good place to put them. And fingers are spread wide with middle fingers pointing forward. Curl the toes under. And as you inhale, lift the hips, keep the bend in the knees. And as you press your hands down and forward, think about stretching the hips back and up. So focus on stretching from your hands to your hips. Look past your feet or toward your navel so that you release the back of your neck. Take a few breaths here. Focus on stretching from the hands to the hips. And then you can press into the right heel. Take a couple of breaths. And then you can press into the left heel. And then press into the right heel. and into the left heel. Good. Do this a couple more times. Good. Lift both heels high, bend the knees, lower onto the mat. Let's bring the feet together, knees wide. Sit back on your heels, elbows out wide, one hand resting on top of the other, and let your forehead rest on your hands for a few moments here. We're going to take a few breaths to kind of integrate that experience. Good, and then coming back into your downward facing dog. So start in table, bring the hands forward. If you want to check your distance, lower onto your forearms, make sure the shoulders are in line with your elbows, and then you can lift the elbows again. Curl the toes under, keep a soft bend in the knees, and then press your hands down and forward as you stretch the hips back and up. Again, pressing into one heel at a time, and as you get more and more comfortable with that, you can start to move around inside your down dog. Maybe sway your hips from side to side. Good. Take another breath. When you're ready, when you need to, feet together, knees wide, come back into your child's pose. Take a few breaths. And when you're ready, come back into downward facing dog again and breathe into this and just feel yourself getting more and more comfortable. If you find that your hands and wrists are really bothering you, if it's really uncomfortable, you've got a couple of options to help ease into things. You can start by simply rolling up your mat, giving yourself a little bit of cushion underneath the heel of your hand, so that when you come into your down dog, it's a little bit of a softer angle on your wrists. The other option is to maybe have a small dish towel, and you can roll it up and put it right under the heel of your hands, this part of your hand. And over time, you'll find that you don't need it. It takes some time to stretch out the muscles in your hands. I remember that myself. It just takes time, and eventually it won't bother you anymore. But what you want to do is make sure that you're pressing into your thumb and your index finger, and that's going to help to keep your hands nice and rooted. What you tend to find people doing is kind of lifting up to take some of that stretch out of the hands because it's uncomfortable, and then all the weight is being put on the wrists, which is really not a good idea. It's better to evenly distribute the weight through your hands. And again, if you need to, you can modify accordingly. There are also yoga wedges that you can get, these little foam wedges that you can use, but if you don't have to spend the money on that, why bother when you can use a towel or just roll up your yoga mat? The other thing to think about are your elbows. You want to make sure you're not hyperextending the elbows, which is what this would look like. So, and some people, when the hands are uncomfortable, in order to give it a break, they'll turn the hands out. And that's not a good idea. It's not a good habit to develop. You're better off keeping your hands like this, with the middle fingers pointing forward, and then let the creases of your elbows face in toward each other. That's going to keep you from hyperextending the elbows. So let the creases of the elbows face in toward each other. The hands are going to be shoulder width apart. So you don't want the hands out wide. You're going to bring them in line with your shoulders. And then the other thing is actually giving more thought to the shoulders. What a lot of people tend to do, and I'm going to turn so that you can see, is they'll have the shoulders hugging up by the ears. That's a lot of tension between the shoulders and the ears, in the neck. So what I want you to do to stabilize the shoulders is draw them down and widen them. So hopefully you can see that. That's the difference between hugging the shoulders up by your ears and drawing them down and widening and expanding. So think about creating space between your shoulders and your ears. So these are just little ways of refining your downward facing dog. Don't worry about perfecting all of this right away. Just kind of let it seep into your consciousness, and you're going to be surprised how much of it's going to stick as you do downward facing dog more and more. So again, the other thing to think about is you're pressing your hands down and forward, and you're stretching your hips back and up. Think about stretching the spine, lengthening the arms. What you don't want to do, especially if you're really flexible in the shoulders, is press the chest to your thighs so much that you overstretch the shoulders. You'll see a lot of this. Try to avoid that. Try to create this long line of energy from your hands to your hips. Stretch the arms, stretch the shoulders, stretch the spine. This is a wonderful way to realign the spine. Relax the neck. So the head weighs anywhere from 8 to 11 pounds. So basically, it's like having a big bowling ball on top of your neck. And if you're constantly lifting your head when you're in this pose, all those muscles in your neck are working to hold up that bowling ball, right? But if you let the neck relax and you kind of let the head hang like a melon, then the neck gets this wonderful traction. So you can shake your head no, nod your head yes. Good, and just look towards your feet. So that's going to help you resist the urge to keep your head lifted like this. So release your neck. Okay, the other thing to think about is evenly distributing the weight between your hands and your feet. You don't want to have all of your weight forward in your hands, because then you're using a whole lot of upper body strength to hold yourself up, and that's going to get exhausting. So you want to try to evenly distribute the weight between your hands and your feet. And then you're creating this lift through the hips. So you don't have all this weight on the lower body, or you don't have all the weight on your hands and on your feet. So you're rooting through the hands and the feet, but then you're lifting through the hips, through that center of the body. It's a wonderfully balancing pose for that reason. Another thing to look for in downward facing dog, if we're not yet flexible in the hamstrings and you want to straighten your legs, because that's what everybody wants to do, right? They see these beautiful yogis that are super flexible and they have their legs straight. And so everyone wants to straighten their legs, and what that does is if your hamstrings are not loose and relaxed yet and stretched, if you don't have that flexibility, it's going to force you to round through the upper body. And again, now I'm using a whole lot of muscular strength to keep myself up. So keep a soft bend in the knees. Focus on stretching from your hands to your hips. Then you can work toward getting the heels to the mat. And don't worry so much about if and when that happens. The other thing to think about is sometimes people think they're tight in the hamstrings, and most people are tight in the hamstrings, but oftentimes we're tight in the calves, and that could be what's actually holding you back here, which is why it's nice to press into one heel and breathe deeply, because then you get that stretch all the way up and down your leg. Good. So again, notice how I'm pressing into my hands and my feet. My weight is evenly distributed. I don't have it all forward. I don't have it all back on my feet. A lot of people want to get the hands and feet on the ground, so they just bring the hands and feet closer together, which also causes them to kind of compromise the pose, because it's actually no longer downward facing dog at this point. So one way to test that for yourself is to transition into plank, high plank. Shoulders should line up right over your wrists and legs are straight. Take a nice deep breath, and you should be able to transition from here into downward facing dog, because ideally this is what we would be moving toward, is sort of a vinyasa flow, where we flow from down dog into plank, into chaturanga, into up dog, back into plank, back into down dog, right? So what you want to do is get comfortable and positioned correctly in downward facing dog. Okay, so if you haven't already, take a break in child's pose, take a few breaths, just integrating everything I've shared so far, because I realize it's a lot. So let's do a quick review. You want to make sure that your hands are nice and spread out and evenly, your weight is evenly distributed. Your hands are shoulder width apart. You want to try to get the creases of your elbows facing toward each other. You don't want to hyperextend here. You want to keep the shoulders pulling down away from your ears, create space between your shoulders and your ears. Press from your hands to your hips, get the stretch along your spine, lifting your hips toward the sky. Let your sits bones lift toward the sky here. Press into the heels until you get more and more comfortable in the legs. Evenly distribute the weight between your hands and your feet. Lift through the midline, the center of the body, finding the balance between those two. And then breathe into that. And just practice this a few times. Every time you do it, you're going to find more and more about downward facing dog that you love. So again, some of the things that are wonderful about downward facing dog is it helps to stretch the hands and the wrists. It lengthens the arms. It stretches and opens up the shoulders. It lengthens the spine and aligns the spine. It's a great stretch for the legs. It's a wonderful all-over stretch. And even if I don't have time to do much of anything, I will come into a good downward facing dog stretch because it helps me feel like I'm really waking up and tuning in to my whole body. Now I want to talk about the energetics of downward facing dog. So we talked about the alignment of it and how to physically get yourself into it. But what are some of the other reasons why we practice down dog? Well, I did already allude to the fact that it's very balancing because you are connecting with the earth from your hands and your feet, like through your hands and your feet. It's very grounding in that way. And yet you're also creating this sense of lift, this lightness, this buoyancy, and that is creating a sense of balance throughout your body. So it's very balancing in that way. It's also a heart-opening stretch. I'm always focusing on asanas that open the heart because we need more of that in today's world, right? When you're in downward facing dog, you're opening your heart to the earth below. You're also opening your heart to the sky above through your back. So it's very much about opening up the heart center in all directions. It also makes it a lot easier to breathe because you've got all this space and length through the torso. So you can take much deeper, richer breaths when you're in downward facing dog. So hopefully I've planted some helpful seeds here that are going to help you fall in love with downward facing dog. It's one of the most powerful asanas in its beautiful simplicity. And what I have found is usually it's the simplest asanas that are the most powerful. So give it a try. Play around with downward facing dog. Breathe into it. Move around inside of it. Find something about it that you love. And I think you'll find that at the moment you fall in love with downward facing dog, you're going to fall in love with yoga. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope this has been helpful. If it has, make sure to let me know so in the comments section below. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel for more videos just like this one. Thanks so much for tuning in. Until next time, namaste.